Hey guys, Sagi here, and today I'm going to bring you a deck that I found from this video, link in the description, that has to be the most fun I've had so far playing Gwent. The reason this deck is so rewarding is not even for its amazing endgame finisher, but because it's completely counterintuitive. Like, there's a lot of decisions and a lot of thoughts that go into your mulligan and the cards that you throw away and the order that which you play your cards, to the point where you have to really consider what's the proper PEMDAS here. You remember PEMDAS, order of operations. And the difference between playing this deck right and playing this deck wrong is the difference between having a guaranteed final last card, that, you know, something that you want, and being able to sort through your entire deck, or just having like 8 cards left and inability to get what you're looking for. Side note, this deck for me was my first foray into Nilfgaard, which is something that I've wanted to do for a very long time. But all the decks that I was seeing online, all the, general construct ideas that I had myself, all revolved around cards I didn't have. Namely, Vilgefortz and Catharsis? You know what I mean. And this deck didn't, and for 800 scraps I was able to build the silver cards that I didn't have and start playing this deck. So that's why I started here. I started with the exact deck that's in that video that I mentioned, but after that I made some alterations, and I'm going to talk about the 2 alterations. It's basically switching out 1 or 2 different cards, and they have different pros and cons to it, and I'll talk about that a little later. Alright, let's get into it. Alright, here's the deck. This is my version. It runs Cynthia as opposed to Roach. There's also another version where you cut Jochum so that you play both Cynthia and Roach, but I don't like that version. So I play the Cynthia version. This is it. Pause here, copy the deck. Moving on. Okay, so the first thing to talk about in this deck is the mulligan. When you mulligan, you want to prioritize throwing out ambassadors first, and then pretty much everything else. You want to throw out the Imperial Brigade before Nilfgaard Knight. You need only 1 Nilfgaard Knight, so then you can keep an Imperial Brigade if you have a lot of spies, but basically throw out everything. Keep First Light over Ambassador. That might be a little counterintuitive, but the idea is if First Light isn't in your deck, you don't need to draw it. What I mean by that is you play First Light. First Light leads you to Emissary, and then after First Light leads you to Emissaries, Emissaries lead you to Ambassadors and to basically everything else in your deck, or, more Emissaries. The idea is to thin out what's in your deck, so when we get around to looking through our deck with Cantarella, we're looking through a lot less. First Light's the start of the chain, whereas Emissaries are the middle, and then whatever else comes out beyond that, whether it's another Emissary or an Ambassador or Nilfgaardian Knight, that comes later in the chain, so you want the start of the chain from the beginning of the game. Also, you want to keep all of your gold and silver cards pretty much universally on your mulligan. Alright, this is a really cool tech play. I used Stefan Skellen in the opening to put Operator on the top of my deck. He was a critical card that I was missing, so I put him there, and now, because Jockin DeWitt automatically plays what's on the top of your deck, as long as it's not a gold card, he'll go ahead and activate Operator's ability. It will activate on Cantarella, and then you'll get to pull off your whole combo without ever actually having to play Operator. So why make more than 1 Cantarella, you ask? Because our deck is teched for it, right? We can not only replay their spy cards that are non-gold, but we can also replay the Cantarella we give them. Basically, the general strategy is to win the first round using spies. Like your final blow, the deterrent to continue to go on, is usually you using John Calveit at the end of your turn. However, if I remember right, this first game plays out a little bit differently. His deck is kind of non-traditional, and he winds up passing in a few turns just a little bit before I need to recall, and as a result I have 2 hero powers. This is actually workable with this deck. Alright, so we won that round, as I said. Now we've got Decoy, 2 Cantarellas. If he plays that 1 Weather spy card that Skellige runs a lot, you can decoy that back. Generally, I will keep Decoy in my hand, even if I'm unsure if they're playing that type of card. Usually, I'll wind up getting to decoy the Cantarella I give them. So your deck's kind of teched for giving them another Cantarella and still coming out on top, and then you wind up playing 3 Cantarellas. And then when you John Calveit, you are retracting 3 weatherproof bodies and creating a huge power swing. Alright, so again, same strategy. You are emptying your deck, playing First Light. It's probably going to be my next move, I can imagine. This might seem like a mistake. Like, looking at this now, it even looks like a mistake. But it's not. And the reason that it's not is because you're deck thinning. And you're setting up for your last turn. You need a critical piece to the puzzle still. You need the Demetrium Bomb. Dimeridium? Demetrium? I don't You need the bomb, basically. And you want to ensure that you get it with your remaining cards. You're going to get one draw now because you play Nilfgaard, and then afterward, you're going to be able to play Cantarella, which will then give you another 4 cards if you don't hit it. If you filter your deck in the right order, most of the time you'll just filter through your entire deck. There are very few games where you're forced to play cards in an order that isn't beneficial to you, or you don't have a hand where you can't do that. The deck's actually really consistent. But you have to be playing it in the right order. If you're playing things out of order, or you're saving a Clear Skies, which, by the way, causes problems versus weather decks. Even if it's the right move to do, it lowers the consistency of finding the answers that you're looking for. Alright, so he plays Champion of Champions, and then we pass. And we lose the round as per plan. Now, on the mulligan here, we're going to get rid of Siri, because she's no longer a worthwhile card to have in our hands. The only time when that might be a good idea is against maybe weather, but it's like never a good idea. And I don't mean mild weather, I mean like stormy weather. Alright, so right now my priority is just putting a body on the field. He opened with Yennefer Conjurer, so I'm going to play Spies. So these Spies don't buff anything, so they're safe to play now without losing out on anything. Like, I'm not worried about pulling an Ambassador. And Yen Conjurer gets no value while you do this, so I'm probably going to play a second Cantarella before I ever wind up playing a body, and that's going to save me 2 points in power.
No one can hide from me.
You might notice that he's playing a bit of an unconventional Skellige deck. That's fine. I just picked this game because I thought it really showed how the mechanics work. Against all of the standard Skellige decks, this deck wins about 75% of the time. And that's from a sample size of maybe 40 games, I want to say. What it loses to is monsters, weather monsters. Consume monsters is the big one. If you were really clever and you play the deck completely the way it's not meant to be played, and you Letho intelligent targets at the right time to keep gold value on your side, you can win the weather monsters fight sometime. But it's obvious that like this deck was not made to fight monsters. Against everybody else though, I've got really good win rates. So I highly recommend trying this. Alright, so now we have Cynthia. Cynthia's not actually doing a lot in this particular game, but Cynthia provides a lot of good things for you at the start of the game. So there will be situations where you don't have Cantarella in your hand, but you already have Operator. And when you have that, and you have something like, say, Stefan Skellen, you can draw Cantarella to the top of your deck. But the problem is, you can't operate on her until she's in your hand. So that's when Cynthia comes into play. Cynthia helps you get that top deck, helps you make your first turns more consistent and more often. Also, if he doesn't play any Spies, I get to go ahead and target dummy my Cynthia, and I'm only giving him 6 power every time I do that. So on every single card in your deck is going to get you better value than 6 power. The Quen doesn't matter because you have nothing that deals damage. Letho banishes. He doesn't deal damage, he just kills the thing and banishes it. You know, it took a lot of consideration, but I really think switching out Roach for Cynthia was the right move. If you play the first version of the deck, the version in the video that I mentioned at the beginning, he plays Roach, and the deck is really smooth and really clever, but occasionally you won't have the right draw card at the right time, and it will make some turns really awkward when they ought not be. Like, you can just get rid of that by playing the draw card instead. I think there's a second draw card in Skellige, but I think it also makes your opponent draw a card, and I think just Cynthia's better because, you know, 6 power guaranteed, you know what he's getting. It's not going to be a tricky thing to deal with. If I was going to pick a deck to beat Skellige, I would pick this particular deck. It does well against everything else, and I think I'm in the positive against every faction except for monsters. Some matchups, due to my low sample size, are still at 100%, and other matchups are in the 75 range, and then monsters is this abysmal 40. It's because Consume eats your Spies, so if it's Consume monsters, you get screwed over like that, and if it's weather monsters, you're going to have to Dimeridium your Letho, so even if you pull off good value from their side, you don't get that large swing that happens when you normally pull Letho off. And there's really not a great way to circumvent that the way that the deck is built.
Improvise.
Okay, so normally at this point your John Calveit would already be used. So your finisher would look something like turn 3 Letho, turn 2 Kahir, turn 1 Dimeridium Bomb, and then you'll get another card, and then John Calveit. But in this game, because of that peculiar opening where I didn't need to John Calveit in the first run, and I wasn't able to use him later with a Cantarella and a decoy to get more value, instead we're going to just end the game here because we've already won. Alright, so that's the basics of how you play the game. We're going to look at one more game just to make sure that you guys get it. Take a second to appreciate this opening hand. This is exactly what you want in an opening hand. So we're looking for the thing that we don't have, which is a Cantarella, and this is why we put Cynthia in the deck over Roach. So, if you had Roach right here, sure, you would have a body on the field, but you would have no way of getting to your Cantarella. You could play Joachim de Witt, but then you can't operate on her. So the key is, in order to get the operator value, you need to draw a card, and there's Cynthia.
I'm impressed.
Conversely, though, if Operator is the card that you pull to the top of your deck, and then you play Joachim de Witt, he will play Operator, which then works on works on Cantarella, which I think happened in the first game.
After the crimes, come on, quick now.
Alright, we're playing Nilfgaardian Knight first, just to give other targets to buff to. I don't want all of my buffs hitting just the back row, because we're against Skellige, and that can get coraled very easily. He scorches way too early versus this deck. He could have killed something much bigger, and he's going to realize that in just a moment. I mean, that's one of those moves that I think is just bad. Because, like, what was he thinking? That I only play one Nilfgaardian Knight? Like, you're at least going to be able to kill another Nilfgaardian Knight later with the Scourge. So if in our hand right now we had Decoy, what we would do is decoy his Cantarella. If you're not worried about him passing, there's no rush to do it. But if you are worried about him passing, you want to decoy the Cantarella as soon as possible. Especially if you know you're going to have to use John Calveit to pull your cards back to win the round. Then you have to get his Cantarella value in. You can't rely on them playing spies themselves, because one, they may or may not play them, and two, if they do play them, you're not going to rely on them having it. So you'd rather take the Cantarella. Also, Cantarella lets you cycle through 2 cards, in that if you don't like your first option, she puts it on the bottom of your deck.
Don't you pester me.
She's just better than the other spies currently, but I think next patch, with the positioning changes, is going to come a change to the Skellige spy, at least, where he's gonna function the same as Cantarella.
Hey, listen here. Listen well. Decently, that is what you folk lack.
Alright, so you notice this is very close in the first round, but I think he gets the feeling he's going to lose, so he plays Ciri here. It is fine to win the round and let him get Ciri value. We're going to make up for it with our Cantarellas. Well, actually, I think we already have. Yeah, we have. And then we also have a Ciri of our own, so we're going to be up one. Going last is important, but it is less important versus Skellige, because King Bran is not useful in the late game. There's nothing he's going to discard later and get value out of, with the exception of if he has a board of 3 ship's cannons. But you can circumvent that by just Lethoing the ship's cannons, and then they're banished, he can't resurrect them, and you don't get discard damage. Also, the reason that this is such a good matchup for you is because even if he buffs like the front row, which does, weirdly enough, happen occasionally, depending on how much of a pissing contest the first round is, you can banish Morkvarg. Letho deals with Morkvarg, and he does not come back. And Oligard. I mean, if you can kill Morkvarg, you can kill anything, right? Alright, so once again, here's a play that looks like a mistake. I'm not convinced it's better all the time. I'm convinced it's better in this situation. So, again, some people, like maybe a weather deck, say maybe you wouldn't make that play, because having an ambassador after they weather you, like especially hitting a target that's in a weathered row, is very useful. Might even be more useful than passing, because they tend to play low power, and if you can get that power and get it to stick, you're in trouble. But against Skellige, and when I know what he's doing, and he's going to buff, you know, a row, and have some big cards that I can take from, this is fine. And I think it's the right play, because you're filtering out your deck, and making it easier for you to get a good draw for the next turn. Always got to keep into account those draws as Nilfgaard. Alright, so you'll notice I kept Decoy. I could have thrown away Decoy and had 6 power now that the Cantarellas are out. In this game, I think, if I remember right, that would have turned out a little bit better, but I wouldn't do it because of spies. So I keep Decoy even in the weird situation that we're in here, where I don't have Cantarella, and he doesn't have Cantarella to play, so that I can decoy it. Because in case he plays a spy, I want to be in a position to replay that spy at him and get card advantage.
Please wait, Your Excellency.
This would matter a whole lot more if it was against, like, a Radovid, somebody who can take more advantage of the card advantage than Skellige. Because, like, the big thing is, you don't want to give them a second hero power if it's useful. But, as you're going to see in a second, you can do it versus Skellige. So the normal finisher, the way that you make this finisher stick, is by playing Letho on turn 3. And by doing that on turn 3, you give them the least time to react to it, anything they might want to set up. It's Letho, Cahir, Dimitri Bomb, hero power is the normal setup. But here I'm going to make a weird decision. So here it looks like I'm setting up for the normal setup, but I actually do things a little bit differently. I believe I play here first. Now here's the thing, there's no good Letho targets. Like, I'm not going to kill 3 things here, anywhere. So instead I play Cahir first. I do this only because it's Skellige, and only because his hero power right now is without worth.
I shall do what I must.
The goddess protect you from all evil.
Don't you pester me.
Alright, so our waiting has paid off. We get to play Letho in the back row, and we get a whole lot more value for it, right? There's really nothing he could have done to avoid that. I say nothing, but like the reason that this deck feels like it's powerful is because people just aren't teching against it. They're not trying to aggressively draw as well as this deck does, and they're usually not playing decoy. So for example, this deck does worse versus like a Thane for a variety of reasons, not just because of the Thane, but because like she could pick up Letho right now if she wanted to, right? So I couldn't do it in that order. Also, she can pick up Cantarellas and get more card advantage that way, and she's probably summoning spies. And then there's that card that negates a spell effect. I forget its name, Shiryu or something. It ambushes, negates a spell effect, and then scorches the board. Because stuff like that exists, like those are harder matchups for the deck. All right, so just a quick summary. You want to filter out your deck as much as possible. During the mulligan or any of the redraw phases, you always want to put back ambassadors. And the only time you want to throw back emissaries is when you already have first lights in their place. You need a body to buff in the beginning, and then you want to keep all your special cards, all your silvers, all your golds. You should have a very positive win rate versus most decks that don't tech against it. Decks that run decoy will give you a little bit of trouble, but you can usually outplay them. And I think that the skill cap on this particular deck is relatively high, not only because figuring out the right order to play things is difficult, but because the harder matches, the matches where you'll get better win percentages over time, need to be played in non-traditional ways. Remember, the traditional way to win is to win with John Calveit in round 1, play out round 2, get card advantage, play Ciri if you have her, and then in round 3, you want to win with Letho. Some matchups will force you to not play that way, and in those matchups, it's going to be whether or not you're clever enough to deal with what problems happen, whether or not you play things in the right order, and whether or not you think about the matchup. Keeping a weather, for example, might be the difference between winning and losing, but it might also be the difference between winning and getting the right card, right? Because if you don't play your weather, you're not going to get the emissary, it's not going to lead to the ambassador, and your deck is going to be a lot thicker. So those decisions are hard, this deck is not easy to play, but I think the win rate is there, and it beats Discard Skellige just like outright. Like, they have to get very lucky, or something very good has to go their way for them to be at an advantage in this matchup. Against other Nilfgaard decks, it does well. Do not overreact to a cow tosser. But if you want to be really cheeky and there's like a really amazing moment for value, you can actually decoy the cow tosser back at them. There's the cow. Although I don't recommend that. Like, once again, don't overreact. Like, get your Cantarellas, get your card advantage. That's what you're looking for. Remember to play your Operator combo right. Basically, you want Operator and Cantarella in your hand. Or if you just have Cantarella in your hand, you want to put Operator on the top of your deck, draw and play Operator with Joachim de Witt, or you can play Cynthia to get him into your hand and then do it that way. However, remember that if you put Cantarella on the front of your deck, you cannot then play Joachim de Witt, or she'll just play onto the board. And that's not going to help you because you'll never get the Operator value. And then you got to figure out something else to do with Operator. Okay, as far as variants go, I liked the Roach version that I played. It felt good to always have a body on the board, but it's not an easy thing to circumvent. I think the Cynthia version is the strongest, and that's the version I'm running right now. But basically, in both situations, the deck plays the same way. You want to mulligan for the right opening hand, and you want to replace the right cards. And then you need to then play those cards in the right order in order to be able to draw out your deck and to guarantee that your last cards are what you're looking for as opposed to trash. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed that. I'll see you next time. My name's Six Saga. I make Overwatch content and Gwent content and all kinds of other stuff. If you'd like to see some of that other stuff, click on these 2 links below. Or if you'd like to help me in doing what I do, click on the kitten.